Thank you so much for your time, Ambassador, and I appreciate that you're not within the process right now, but that you really understand what's going on. How do you respond to accusations from the American side that one of the reasons why the Doha round has lost its momentum is because of India, and India sending mixed signals?
I think you must understand that these are old games that negotiators play. If you don't like the message that the other guy is sending you, frequently you go to the media and say, I'm getting very confusing signals or mixed signals.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that as far as India is concerned, we are very keen that this round, which is already badly delayed, should conclude at the earliest. And we are willing to walk the extra mile to ensure that we get an outcome quickly. But however, it's important also to recognize that this is a development round.
Yeah.
And therefore, the final outcome has to reflect the development mandate and the development aspirations.
All right, one of the issues that India's constantly argued, and I suppose you're one of those proponents, is that as you discuss the agricultural issues within this development round, it's important to put the small-scale farmer at the center of the equation. Don't speak in esoteric terms about tariffs, non-tariff barriers. Look at what comes back to the small-scale farmer. And that's certainly something that the Indian government is concerned about, and it's something that many African leaders are concerned about, because over 70% of Africans live or work within the agricultural sector. What compromises are you looking for?
Well, I think we must recognize that if we are to have a sustainable globalization process, then the growth that we witness has to be inclusive. And the fact of the matter is that the bulk of the poor around the world live in rural areas, and they depend on agriculture for their subsistence, for their livelihoods, etc. And therefore, this round, which is the development round, has to conclude with an outcome which, if it does not do well for them, it certainly should not do any harm to them. And that is why we have been consistently arguing that the concerns of these poor farmers around the developing world have to be at the forefront of any outcome in the agriculture negotiation.
You say, certainly if it's not superbly beneficial, it can't harm the local farmers in Africa, in India and other parts of the developing world. How would the current context of talks not work in their favor? Because we do have a situation where, for instance, they're talking about reducing tariffs on agro products, for instance, but there's still an insistence, especially from a country like France, on keeping subsidies for their farmers. Why is this a disconnect?
Well, that's the point. I think the first issue that we have to deal with in the agriculture negotiations is that of distortions. And these distortions have been caused by two things. One is the huge amount of subsidies that have been paid to developed country farmers. And the second is the market access restrictions that many developed countries employ. So the most important outcome in agriculture negotiation has to be to tackle these distortions effectively. Now, presently what we have on the table in terms of the offers for reduction of subsidies, in our calculation, they do not affect presently applied levels of support. Therefore, we need to do more in that direction. And similarly, on the market access issue, we continue to have demands for more restrictions on market access. For instance, in the case of sensitive products that the developed countries have been talking about, they want more products to be declared as sensitive, and therefore there will not be that relaxation on those products that we have sought.
Okay, but you know, we also talk about reciprocity in this particular process, and for as much as Europe and America have to give, Africa and the developing world also have to give. And this is the argument from their side, is that not enough is being done to open the developing world markets for access of industrial goods. You want your agricultural products in their economies, you need to open your economies for some of their manufacturing goods. And the fear on this side is that if you liberalize too much, you'll decimate local manufacturing. But it's a give and take. Why are we not prepared to give as much?
Well, I think we have to understand the present context of the negotiations. As far as industrial goods are concerned, we already have a broad agreement on the nature of commitments to be taken by developed countries and developing countries. And don't forget, the least developed countries are not required to make these concessions. So we already have a structure of concessions. We have the numbers in place. What remains to be negotiated in the industrial goods sector, there are two issues. One is that some countries, like South Africa, for instance, argue that in the previous round, because they were treated as a developed country, they gave more concessions than other developing countries. And therefore, this time around, there should be some special dispensation for them. And the second issue is the American demand for that even though participation in certain sectoral negotiations for deeper reductions in tariffs, even though the mandate is for voluntary participation, they need the participation of countries like India and China and Brazil. And on that particular issue, the negotiations are still incomplete.
You mentioned that South Africa also raising the issue that they can't be classified as a developed economy despite its first world infrastructure. And it's not just peculiar to South Africa. Some of the other BRIC member states have also been resistant to reclassification. India's been quite outspoken about this one. And yet these are some of the economies that are growing above 8%, that are now the catalysts for global growth, that are the forces to reckon with internationally. Why can't there be a reclassification?
Well, two things. One is that you do not change the rules of the game during the middle of the game. We agreed on a certain mandate in 2001, and in that mandate there are only three classifications. So one is developed countries, the other is developing countries, and the third is the least developed countries. Right. Now you cannot create a separate category of countries in the middle of the negotiations. And secondly, don't forget countries like India. Though we may have done well in some sectors, we also have a very large number of very, very poor people in India. For instance, about 650 million people in India depend on agriculture, and more than half of them are very poor people.
We talk about the Doha round of free trade talks in a context now where we've come out of the credit crisis, where Western economies are becoming more protective of their economies, where there's a push to get exports out from every corner of the world. It's a competitive environment, it's a cutthroat environment, and everybody's looking after their own. Can we really continue talking about free trade in this environment?
Well, this concern about protectionism is real, but I think it should not be exaggerated. Because the kind of monitoring that is being done of various trade policies by various countries reveals that there have been protectionist actions, but they are not really something which is, which the system cannot handle. So for the moment, the issue of protectionism, while being a concern, I think we need to look at it in that context. And as far as market openness is concerned, I would say it's certainly in everybody's interest that we pursue our objective of gradually opening markets everywhere.
India at this stage is regarded as the leading voice and the voice of reason for the developing economies within this Doha round of trade talks. To what extent is India's position in sync with Africa's position? Because you've got a big profile within this context of what's happening at Doha. But the Africans, although their issues are reflected in these agricultural discussions, how big is their voice, and how is India using this platform to advance their issues?
Well, I think the first thing I would like to tell you is that our cooperation with Africa is not new. We've been cooperating with Africa for at least half a century. And we have been consistent in that position. We have always supported the demands that African countries have raised. Now, there are a number of African groups within the WTO. For instance, there is an African group, there is a group of least developed countries, there is a group of small economies, there is a group of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Island countries. We have always worked in cooperation with them. And I cannot recall any issue on which we have had a difference with them. And specifically, whenever there are small group meetings of 4, 5, 6 countries, where India is there, but the African countries are not, we make it a point to ensure that the African perspective is reflected.
Okay, we do know that India has become a major investor in Africa, probably the second largest trading partner for most African countries, invested over $50 billion, and I know that number is rising quite steadily. Going forward, what do you think the broader tangible benefits and material gains of South-South cooperation are going to be, irrespective of what's happening at the WTO?
I think there is a natural synergy between the growth in India and the growth in Africa. And we would very much like to be part of the African growth story. The investment that you have witnessed so far, I believe they are only a beginning. And in the months to come, you will see many more large investments coming into Africa. Right. And we always believe that our investment should not be for short-term gain, but for a long-term partnership where both sides benefit equally.
Obviously, you're here also as part of the newly launched Global Poverty Summit. What sort of issues are you going to be raising on behalf of India, but also in terms of what's happening internationally, as we need to raise the profile of emerging markets?
Well, I'm here today in my personal capacity, but I think the impasse in the Doha round is an issue of concern, should be an issue of concern for all developing countries. Because as the global economy widens and as the developing countries enter the global trading system, the rules that are enshrined in the WTO provide a protection against arbitrary behavior by larger countries. And it is in our interest to strengthen these rules. And to the extent that the Doha round contributes to that strengthening, I think the developing countries have perhaps a larger stake in the conclusion of the round.